Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. Now, if you were reading along up on the screen, or if you were looking in your Bible, you might have noticed that verse 4 was kind of empty. Did anybody see that? That it just has a little 4 there, and then it goes to 5 right away. The reason for that is that there is some debate about the validity of verse 4. It was not included in the oldest manuscript evidence, right? But it's in some of the more recent texts. And so many scholars debate whether or not John actually wrote that or if it was added in later. They do not debate the validity of what's stated in the scripture or in that passage. They just question whether it was there or not. So most of the time, if you're reading through your Bible, you'll see the 4 there, it's empty, and then down below it'll tell you what's supposed to be there. And I'm going to read you that piece that is in some of the newer manuscripts, but not the older manuscripts. It says this: "Paralyzed, and they waited for the moving of the waters. From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. The first one into the pool after each such disturbance would be cured of whatever disease they had." Now, here's the thing. I wanted to share that with you because I think it gives us a better idea of what this man was doing there and what it was that had Jesus there on that day as well. There were people that would gather at this pool in Bethesda, and an angel would come, stir the water, first person in would be healed. Now, whether that worked or not, I don't know, okay? But what we know for sure is that the people sitting around that pool believed that it worked, don't we? And that's why they were there. And this man had wanted to get into the water, and yet every time it stirred, someone would beat him because he was an invalid and incapable of caring for himself. And so he was not able to get into the water. So with that in mind, our goal in this series is to understand, as followers of Jesus, how we might be like Jesus. That's our heartbeat. And so as we're going through these essential stories, we're looking at them from the perspective of what can we do to be like Jesus. And so with that in mind, for me, I believe that the key to this entire passage is found in verse 14. Look at what Jesus said. He said, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." Now, many people have taken this and they've gone off on a terrible tangent with it. And here's what people have said. Because Jesus looks at the man and says, "Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you," they have tied the man's physical condition to his sin and said, "See, he was an invalid because he was a sinner, and so Jesus forgave him, and he says, don't do that anymore. If you do other sins, then something bad will happen to you, and you will become, you'll have even something worse happen to you physically." But that's not what Jesus was doing. He was not implying that the sin was the cause of his illness or that more sin would lead to more physical problem. What Jesus wanted us and this man to understand was the seriousness of our problem with sin. You see, as bad as the issues we face in this world can be, the physical things that take place, they are nothing. They are nothing compared to the consequences of sin and the danger that sin presents to our spiritual health. We know this because this was a consistent theme in Jesus' teaching, wasn't it? At one point, Jesus said, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. That seems pretty drastic, doesn't it? Just a little bit. Now, I want to be clear, Jesus was not endorsing self-mutilation, and nobody go home today and get the butter knife, okay? Don't go crazy, all right? What he wanted us to understand is that our physical problems, as bad as they can be, pale in comparison to the dangers that are represented by sin and our spiritual problems. And what better way to demonstrate his priority than this? Consider again the circumstances of this story. Jesus encountered a man, an invalid, which is somebody who's too weak or diseased to be able to take care of themselves. The man was incapable of taking care of himself, and he had been that way for 38 years. How many of you guys aren't even 38 years old? Okay? Think about it. Longer than your entire life, the man had been incapable of caring for himself. Now, we can get into debate until the cows come home. I'm sure there are things that are worse, but as I thought about this week, I thought there's probably not a whole lot out there that's worse than being completely incapable of taking care of yourself. That could happen to you physically. Okay? I'm sure there's other things, but that's got to be in the top 5, doesn't it? You're completely incapable of caring for yourself for 4 decades. 4 decades. And yet, here's Jesus talking to this man, and he says, hey, do you know how bad that was? If you don't deal with your sin problem, something worse is going to happen. As bad as what you've encountered physically, it's nothing compared to the dangers that sin in your life represents. So, what do we learn from Jesus here? I think the first thing we learn is that if we want to be like him, we need to be concerned with the spiritual needs of other people. And we talked about this last week, and it bears repeating. We need to look for opportunities to talk about Jesus with people. We need to have conversations with people where we deal with real issues and we warn them about their sin. Let me ask you really quick, straw poll. How many of you in the last year have told someone they need to stop sinning? And it can be a specific sin. Maybe not, just stop sinning. It can be stop killing horses, okay? If you were here last week, you get that, okay? It's not something we regularly do, is it? And yet Jesus gives us that example, doesn't he? Jesus had a difficult conversation with this man where he says, hey, listen, you're in danger. You need to stop sinning so something worse doesn't happen to you. And I want to be clear. Do you hear the motivation behind Jesus' words? It's not, you disgust me, stop sinning. It's stop sinning so something worse doesn't happen to you. His motivation is love. His motivation is what is best for this person. The question, though, is this. If this should be a regular part of how we do things, if we need to engage in conversations where we look at people and say, stop sinning so bad things don't happen to you. Deal with your spiritual issue, your spiritual health. How do we get there? How do we get to the place where we can have that conversation? Because as I said last week, too many people take the bullhorn approach, right, as Christians, where we hammer people with their sin and sit in judgment when they fail to take our advice, don't we? We just walk around and shoot people with our Christian gun and say, you sinner, 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 and it's everywhere, isn't it? We are quick to point out people's sin. I think this is a perfect example, this story, of how we're supposed to do it. Jesus shows us the way. It is an awesome example of Jesus' cunning. How do you guys like it that Jesus was cunning? Some of us are like, oh, I don't like that. That seems like a deception. No, Jesus was cunning. He was smart. He knew how to do things the right way. Look at what he did. Jesus knew that this man's greatest need was freedom from sin. He knew that. That was his biggest problem. It was the biggest danger represented in his life. But Jesus also understood that there was no way that this man could even begin to consider his spiritual problem because of the physical problem he was experiencing. Imagine this situation. Jesus walks up to the guy and says, hey, stop sinning or something worse is going to happen to you. as he's laying there by the pool, 38 years as an invalid, going, what's worse than this, man? I would welcome the sweet release of death at this point. There's not much worse that can happen to me, Jesus. So had Jesus come to him with this spiritual discussion, this spiritual conversation first, the guy would have been like, I don't even care what you're saying to me, man. You don't know anything. Get away from me. Nothing that the man could have imagined would have been worse than what he was experiencing at the time. But Jesus didn't do that because he understood that there was no way to address the man's most important need until he dealt with the man's felt need. And that's an important phrase for us to understand as followers of Jesus. Felt need. Let me explain what that means. Imagine a person had a body completely and totally riddled with tumors. And just they're covered in all these tumors, right? And at the same time, they have a hypodermic needle sticking in their eyeball. Which of those two situations presents the greater danger? The cancer or the needle? The cancer, right? The needle, you may lose the eye. It's incredibly painful, but cancer will kill you, right? But if you brought that person into an emergency room, which one of those situations do they want to deal with first? They want that needle out of their eye. It's more pressing. It's more painful. It's more of an immediate situation. If you said, hey, we're going to do the biopsy, we're going to get the results, we're going to start the chemo, and then naturally the needle will fall out. No. You have to start with the needle. You have to start with the situation. Jesus understood this. And so he healed the man. He fixed his felt need, which then gave him an opportunity to deal with his greatest need. If we're going to be like Jesus, we have to be people who meet the felt needs of people. We have to be people who meet the felt needs of people because it's the right thing to do and because it will give us an opportunity to speak about more important things, to have those stop sinning conversations. Now, you may be thinking this morning, that's great, Scott. Not really able to heal invalids. It's not really something I'm capable of. I can't just stick my hand out and say, get up and walk around. Well, don't get caught up in the physical or specific need that Jesus met. There are all kinds of felt needs that we will encounter. Physical, relational, emotional. You may encounter people who have a financial need. They might need food or friends. They might need someone to babysit or water their plants or watch their house or drive them places or teach them how to read. Felt needs are just that. They are the needs that someone feels at that exact time. And listen, I want you to hear me very clearly here. They get to define them because it's about what they feel their need is. Did you hear me? They get to define their felt need because it's about what they feel their need is. This man's greatest need, if you asked him, hey, what's the biggest need in your life? He would have said, well, I'd really like to be able to take care of myself. I'm an invalid. I can't walk. I can't care for myself. I can't go to the bathroom on my own. I'd really like to take care of myself. That was his felt need. It was the situation that he was dealing with at that point in time. And just because you don't perceive someone's need as important, it doesn't mean that it isn't. And so we cannot address the more serious need until we address the need that they feel, regardless of how important we think that need is. Let me give you some examples. You may realize that a homeless person needs a job, but right now, all they can think about is a sandwich. I'm not much of an animal lover. It's kind of well documented. I'm not a dog guy. Just not. I got bit by a dog as a kid. I don't care for dogs. But some of you guys, who likes dogs? You're a big dog person. A lot of you guys are big. Well, a lot of you guys are big dog people. Listen, if your dog got sick and needed surgery and you dropped $3,000 on your dog's surgery, I would think you were insane. I would say, it's a dog, man. Okay? But to you who loves dogs, you'd think you were nuts to not spend the $3,000 to save your dog, wouldn't you? In the same way, I'm a huge Seahawks fan. So I've been in a bad mood for 2 weeks. Last week's loss ruined my birthday. Just ruined my birthday. I'm not even going to count it since we lost. So if you don't like sports, you probably think I'm nuts, don't you? You're like, just get over it, man. You probably think, go to Starbucks. Who cares that they sold your basketball team to Oklahoma City and that you don't ever get to watch the NBA anymore? Just get over it, man. Well, I'm not over it. I'm not going to get over it. You see, here's what you need to understand, what we have to understand. In every situation, people feel what they feel. And it is not our job or our place to tell them to stop feeling it. If they have a felt need, it is our job to meet them at the point of their felt need, so that we have the opportunity to speak about their actual need. You may see, that's not a real need, get over it, but until you deal with it, you can't get to the real thing. So, how do we do this? How do we meet felt needs? How do we be those people who can help people deal with the felt need and move on to the greater spiritual need? Well, I see 4 things in this story that I want us to look at this morning, things that Jesus did in regards to this man that we need to emulate if we're going to meet felt needs. So, the first thing is this. Jesus identified the man's felt need. Okay? As Christians, many of us are quick to rush from observation to judgment, aren't we? Without ever taking time to get the facts. We see a homeless person and assume they're lazy or on drugs. We hear about a man struggling with addiction to pornography and assume he's a pervert. Or we see a child acting out and assume that they have bad parents. Why? I'm convinced it's because this allows us to avoid getting involved. If I see people in these situations, I can make a quick diagnosis and deem them unworthy of our time or unable to change. Basically, I see someone and say, they're getting what they deserve. That homeless guy on the street, he's getting what he deserves. He shouldn't have been lazy like I wasn't lazy. I worked hard. I got a job, and look at me. I can do whatever I want. That pervert over there who's losing his marriage, yeah, he's getting what he deserves for being a sexual deviant. Good for him. I'm glad he's losing it. That kid that's running around and nobody respects those people, good. They deserve it because they're crummy parents who haven't done a good job, and we love to do that. We like to make a quick diagnosis, deem them unworthy, unable to change, getting what they deserve, because it allows us to justify our selfishness and continue to walk around and say, oh, what a good little Christian am I. But that's not the example Jesus set. Look at what he did in verses 5 and 6. I love this. Verse 5, one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time. Do you see that? Jesus did not rush to judgment. He did not make an assumption. He made an observation, and then he took the time to research the man's situation. Even if it doesn't give us the details, it tells us Jesus figured out, hey, what's going on with that guy? He asked around. He got more of the story. And then armed with accurate information, he was able to address the man's felt need. Listen, like Jesus, we must invest in people's lives on a level that allows us to know what their felt need is. We have to dig deeper to find out what the need is that is represented in their life. And that's going to take something. You know what it's going to take? Time. Effort. The things we don't want to give up, and so we don't ask the questions. It's so much easier to drive by that guy. It's so much easier to just pass judgment. It's so much easier to not do the work. That's not what Jesus did. He did the work. He took the time. He figured out what was going on. And here's what you might find. That homeless guy that you think's lazy or on drugs got laid off. He's been pounding the pavement to find a job. He's turned in 35 applications. He's been everywhere he can go. And who knows, maybe he's mentally or physically handicapped. Here's the thing. Maybe what that guy needs is not a lecture from you on the value of hard work. Maybe what he needs from you is a reference so he can get a job. Maybe he needs a lead on a job because you know somebody. Maybe what they need is not for you to look down your nose and explain how wrong they are. Maybe what they need is somebody to give them a hand up. The guy who's struggling with pornography, the pervert. Maybe what he needs is to understand that he's loved exactly the way he is. Maybe what he needs to understand is that he has value in and of himself, and that he doesn't have to go looking for it in a place that never delivers. That kid who's running crazy and those awful, terrible parents, can I tell you their story? That kid's older brother has leukemia. He's in the hospital. Mom and dad are up all nights, all hours, doing everything they can. They're praying fervently. And what they need is not for you to explain to them how crappy they are as parents. They need you to pray for a miracle with them and come alongside them and help them as they try to care for all of their kids. You see, the key is this. We can only identify people's felt need if we take the time to learn their story. But let me just go ahead and talk to that too. What if at the end of the day you find out the homeless guy really is lazy? What if at the end of the day you find out that the pornography addict is really just a sexual pervert? What if at the end of the day you find out that those parents are just really crummy parents? Do they not still have a need? Are we not still called to meet it? Second thing I see that Jesus did. Jesus did not force himself on the man. When I was 2 years old, my parents were in the Air Force. And we were on the base, and one day, that's me. We went to the BX, which was like a target on the base. And we were walking, we came to a crosswalk. And we were getting ready to walk across this crosswalk, and my dad, you know, I've got this drink, and it's really, really busy. There's traffic everywhere. So my dad scoops down, picks me up, carries me across the street. And we get to the other side, and I looked at him, and I'm freaking out. And I said, I have legs. They work, man. And so I threw enough of a fit that they walked back across the street, set me down, and let me walk across the street holding my little drink. Okay? Yeah, they didn't do a very good job with that one. They should have beat me. But it's on camera. Don't do it now. Okay. Here's the thing I want you to hear. Just because someone needs help does not mean that they want help. Just because someone needs help, it doesn't mean they want help. Look at what Jesus said in verse 6. He said, do you want to get well? That's a stupid question, isn't it? Jesus asked a stupid question, didn't he? At first blush, if you were laying there next to the guy, wouldn't it seem dumb? Yeah, man, we're laying by the pool. Yeah, we're not getting a suntan here. We're at the stirring pool for a reason. He's an invalid. Yes, he wants to get well, Jesus. It seems at first blush like the dumbest question that anybody's ever asked. But it's not dumb. It reveals to us the heart of God. Because here's the thing. God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. He is the all-powerful, all-awesome creator of the universe who can tell people who are dead to get up and they're alive again. He's the God who can create something out of nothing. He can make blind people see. He can make lame people walk. He can make lepers be clean. He can do absolutely anything. He is amazing. But he never forces himself on us. Ever. Ever. Even though he's able to meet every need we ever have or ever will have, he will not do so against our will. And so that leads me to this place, because I hear people complain all the time about terrible things in the world. And what I want to point them to is James chapter 4, verse 2. And it's the second half of it. It says this: you do not have because you do not ask God. God does not force himself on us. He respects the free will that he gave to us. But unfortunately, like 2-year-old me, we are often crippled by our own pride. We don't ask for help, and we don't let those who are willing and able to help us do so. Jesus will not force himself on us. He will not make us take his help. He will not make us be saved. He will not do any of those things. He continually pursues us. He continually makes himself available to us. He says, I can do this. Let me do this. He continually lets us know. He gives us these opportunities. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? But he won't force himself. We need to understand this. Sometimes the church tries to force themselves on people. We try to make people take our help. I'm helping you. I remember when we were kids, my little brother, we had this little cat, and it wasn't eating. And so my brother grabbed it by the head and was like jamming its face in the milk, saying, "Eat, kitty, eat." He was helping the cat like my kids help birds. It's genetic. Okay? He really wanted to help that cat. That's not how it works. We cannot force people. We cannot force ourselves on people. We need to offer ourselves to people like Jesus did. Say, here I am. I will help you. I'm available. I will do whatever I can. But we can't force ourselves. The third thing that Jesus did is that he didn't allow society's thinking to impact him. Jesus healed this man on a Saturday. Why is that bad? It's the Sabbath. And this drew the attention of the Jewish leaders because his actions violated their understanding of the law. Did you hear how I said that? It violated their understanding of the law. Jesus knew what day it was. And he certainly could have waited a day. What's 38 years, 264 days, as opposed to 38 years, 263? That's not how Jesus works. Jesus saw a man in need and said, not one more day. Not one more minute. We're fixing this and we're fixing it now. He didn't allow the fact that it was the Sabbath to stop him from healing this man. Now, you think, well, okay, how does that relate? This is going to sound crazy to you. But if you really start to help people and meet the felt needs of people, other people are going to criticize you. If you really start helping people, other people will criticize you. It may be because they feel guilty. It may be because they don't like the way you're helping. It may be because they just don't like you. Help anyway. Meet needs anyway. We talked about this in first service. I asked you, Pat, I'll ask you again. How many families did you guys serve on Saturday at the homeless food distribution yesterday? 40 families, right? Okay, that's great news, isn't it? 40 homeless people got food. Yeah, we can clap for that. It's a good thing. Except, hold for applause. Okay, good. There are people in our community that think that's terrible because you gave them food. All that's doing is encouraging those homeless people to stay homeless. Nobody would think that. Yeah, people think that. Or they don't like the fact that you gave them peanut butter and jelly. Or they don't like the fact that you gave them cookies. They don't need cookies. You're contributing to obesity. They're homeless and obese. I mean, it sounds nuts, doesn't it? But it's true. And if you've ever actually tried to help people, you find people will criticize you. Help anyway. Jesus did not base his actions on the opinion of the crowd. Jesus based his actions on the will of the Father. He did what God called him to do. We have to do the same. We need to pray, say, God, what do I do? How do I help? And if other people don't like it, out of the church or in the church, we do it anyway. If we know that we've been led by God, we do the loving and right thing. We don't allow people's understanding, people's prejudice, people's bias, people's guilt, people's whatever to keep us from doing the will of God. Jesus wasn't held back by the fact that it was the Sabbath because he understood what the Sabbath was actually for. The Sabbath for man, not man for the Sabbath. The fourth thing that Jesus did is he challenged the man to live by faith. Look again at verses 8 and 9. Jesus was on a roll with these crazy statements, right? Do you want to get well? And then he tells the guy who's been an invalid for 38 years, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Imagine being the guy laying down next to that guy, going, well, that's pretty cruel. The guy can't walk. I mean, imagine you were in a restaurant and you saw somebody who was in a wheelchair and somebody walked over and said, hey, get up and walk, man. What would you think of that person? You'd think, what a jerk, right? You'd hit him with something. You like stab him with a fork or find Alicia's rock and drop it on him. That's an awful thing to say to somebody, get up and walk. He can't walk. But Jesus looks at this guy who can't walk and says, get up. Pick up your mat and walk. Get up, pick up that mat and walk. Jesus asked him to do the impossible. Can I tell you this morning, I told you we need to meet felt needs so that we can get to spiritual needs. But just because we're dealing with felt needs, it doesn't mean that God isn't a part of the equation or the conversation. Jesus asked this man to walk by faith. What is faith? Faith is trusting God. It's believing that God is able to do what he says he can do. And many of our felt needs are answered, and I would even go further than what I wrote down here. Pretty much all of our felt needs are answered by trusting God. Pretty much all of them. God has the answer to our problems if we will trust him and do it his way, even if it doesn't make sense. Think about it this way. If you were dealing with somebody who was struggling with their finances, they had terrible financial trouble, they didn't have any money, what's the right solution to them? You know what you should tell them? Give 10% of everything you make to God. Okay, that's not very good math, is it? They don't have enough money to deal with the things that they have in their lives, but you're going to tell them to give 10% of what they have? That seems crazy, doesn't it? Except, here's the thing. Do you know that's the only thing that has to do with money that comes with a promise? Here's the promise I'll make to you. God says to us, if you will bring the whole tithe, I will pour out blessing upon you so much it won't even be able to fit. That's faith, guys. That doesn't make sense. It's the impossible. To tell somebody you don't have any money, give 10% of it away. That's nuts. How about this one? Kids at school or an adults at work, and you've got a bully problem. Have you ever dealt with a bully problem? Somebody's mean to you. They pick on you. They hit you, whatever. And you look at them and say, I have the answer for you. This person's your enemy. You know how you deal with your enemy? You pray for them. You love them. If they hit you, you turn the other cheek. That's crazy. We live in America. What do we do in America when someone hits us? We hit them back. A bully punches me, there you get punched back. It's America, right? How many parents, how many of you had your parents tell you that? Someone hits you, you hit them back. Right? Jesus didn't say that. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Jesus said, if somebody wants to take your stuff, give them all of it. That's crazy talk. That doesn't make sense. It's totally the opposite of man's wisdom. It's nuts. It's crazy. And God's wisdom often seems crazy, but it works. And think about it this way. The people you run into who have felt needs, a lot of times are in that situation because they tried to do things the world's way. And they found out that it didn't work. You know what they need? It's not more of the world's advice. They need to know, what does God say? I've been trying to do it the world's way. I need to do it God's way so that I actually see something change. They need God's wisdom from God's word. That's what Jesus gave him. Think about it. Jesus didn't say, do you want to get well? Well, I've got this miracle elixir that I just found down the street at the doctor's, and I'm going to pour it in, and you'll... He didn't use man's medicine to fix him. He used God's power. God's power. Just because you're not dealing with the greatest spiritual need that someone has, it doesn't mean that God should not be a part of the conversation. God's way of doing things might not make sense. It might not be what we expect, but it works. You see, that's what we need to call people to. We need to call people to faith, that God knows what he's doing, even if we don't want it, even if we don't like it. And sometimes that's the way it goes. But God's way is always best. When we were in southern Idaho, we were in our church there in Fruitland, and there was an incredible couple, Dick and Betty Reynolds. And they had they were an incredible part of the church. They led Bible studies, and they were wonderful people. They had a daughter that they had adopted. Her name was Jenny. Jenny was in my youth group. She was a 7th grader in my very first youth group. It was kind of like, it was her first youth group and mine, and we kind of were in this together. And, Jenny's this wonderful young girl. And Betty and Dick just were awesome. And Betty got breast cancer. And we gathered as a church, and we prayed and prayed and prayed, and it was a long journey. And I remember we were at a prayer meeting one night, and we were all praying, and everyone was praying that God would heal her and heal her. And probably as clear, in the top 5 of the most clear I've ever heard God. And I told the people, God spoke to me, and he is going to heal Betty. But not the way we want him to. He's going to give Betty a new body. And people were angry with me. They were like, how dare you not have faith? I said, it's the opposite. I have incredible faith. We just don't like the answer. And that's exactly what happened. Betty went to be with the Lord. She got a new body. And we didn't want that. We didn't want that. That's not what we wanted. I still wish that's not how it would have gone. I wish it would have gone a different way. But it's not the way it went. It went the way that God thought was best. He answered our prayer by giving Betty a new body. And that's what God gets the right to do. He gets to answer our problems. He gets to meet our needs in the way that works best. And that's really what we want anyway, isn't it? God's definition of best and not mine. God will do the impossible. And we need to be people who call people to the impossible, to the seemingly impossible, to giving away 10% so that you can actually have something, to loving your enemies instead of fighting back, to accepting that sometimes the answer is not the answer that we want. If we're going to be like Jesus, that's what we have to do. So, here's the hard part as we kind of close this thing up. Okay, I hear you, Pastor. We need to meet felt needs so that we can get to the greatest needs, and we need to deal with people at the point of that need. And how do we do that? Well, there's a problem. How far do we go? And what do we do if people don't respond? And how do we deal with all of those pieces to it? Well, the first thing you need to understand is that we're not responsible for people's response, right? We don't force ourselves on people, and we can't keep making them do anything. We can only be available to people. To make ourselves available and be on the lookout for the things that God would have us do. And sometimes that'll take one interaction, and sometimes it'll take years to meet someone's felt need. That's not our job to decide which is which. Our job is to be available and to listen to the Lord. Amen? But here's the key. Because the danger is that you've got to walk this line between help and enabling, don't you? And that's a very real thing. And sometimes we use the concept of enabling as an excuse not to get involved. But it's a very real reality. How do we make sure we don't enable? Here's the key for me. We have to be motivated by love. If you're motivated by love, you can't go wrong. You may get it wrong, but you didn't get it wrong. Because I'd rather you tried to help somebody out of love than deem somebody unworthy of help out of selfishness. We have to be motivated by love. So you're sitting here this morning. What's the solution to all this? How do I become this person who meets felt needs? Okay, let me tell you. A lot of people will say, well, what you need to do is you need to sign up for the homeless program. Go ask Pat. Well, we need to come help the homeless. I can't stand the homeless. I think they're all a bunch of lazy idiots, but okay, I'm going to go do it, right? That's not the right answer. Because how do we actually love people, or how do we actually get the motivation to do these things? It's through love. We love because he first loved us. If we're going to be these people, we have to love God and love people. So the answer is this. If you're struggling with motivation to meet people at the point of their need, if you're struggling with the bad parents, the sexual pervert, the lazy homeless person, whatever it is you see, the answer is not to grin and bear it and figure it out. The answer is to return to your first love. The answer is to spend time with God. We sang this morning, break my heart for what breaks yours. That has to be our prayer. God, break my heart for what breaks yours. Give me a heart for people where I actually love as you have loved me. That's a love that comes through us from God. It's not something you just grin and bear and figure it out. The answer is not to push through. The answer is to get back on your knees at the feet of God and say, I need you to help me love people the way you've called me to love people. I need to understand better the love you have for me so that I can pour it out on others. Let's pray.